I'm living a happy and settled life after marrying into a wealthy family. Patrick, however, couldn't resist mocking my supposedly simple lifestyle as we sat in the hotel lobby. His sharp words broke the peaceful moment, and he taunted me with his latest news. He proudly shared that his new wife is the daughter of the president of Goldsmith Enterprises. Patrick laughed, his tone full of pride, but when he mentioned Goldsmith Enterprises, something clicked for me. I knew that name, though I couldn't place it at first. Then it hit me. Patrick kept bragging, unaware of the irony I found in his words. My name is Emma, I'm 40 years old, and I live a content life with my husband, Patrick. I work in my family's real estate business, mostly handling office duties, while my father, the company president, manages the big decisions. As an only child, I know I'm expected to lead the company one day. Even with this huge responsibility ahead, I've managed to keep a good balance between my personal and professional life, especially when it comes to Patrick. Patrick finished high school and works at a moving company, a tough job that I deeply respect. To avoid making him feel uncomfortable, I rarely talk about my university degree or my future role as the president of our business. Patrick and I met in college through a mutual friend. After she had Patrick's company handle her move, she introduced us. At first, Patrick was interested in her, but when she turned him down, he and I got to know each other better. His laid-back attitude complemented my organized personality, and our relationship grew stronger. We got married in our late 20s after a short courtship, and our marriage has been smooth ever since. Patrick's parents welcomed me warmly, which was a refreshing change from the in-law troubles some of my friends face. Even though Patrick's job is physically demanding and keeps him out late, he has always stayed dedicated to our relationship. On his hardest days, he never forgets to thank me for waiting up to have dinner with him, and that means everything to me. I felt lucky to have a loving husband, but after a year of marriage, things started to change. One night, as we were getting ready for bed, Patrick suddenly brought up having children. His tone was sharp, which caught me off guard. I had thought about starting a family too, and even though we weren't actively trying, I believed it would happen when the time was right. I calmly reassured him, saying, "It's only been a year. There's no need to rush." I wanted kids, but I knew stressing about it wouldn't help. Trying to ease the tension, I kept my tone light, but Patrick seemed unusually serious. He even mentioned statistics saying, there's about a 97% chance of getting pregnant within a year if a couple isn't using birth control. I didn't know much about those numbers, but they seemed high to me. To keep things practical, I suggested, if you're worried, maybe we should both get tested. That way, we'll know for sure. His reaction, however, was unexpectedly harsh. "What are you trying to say?" "That it's my fault," he snapped. "It's usually the woman's fault." His words stung, and it was the first time he had spoken to me so coldly. I hadn't accused him of anything. I only wanted us to work together on this. But he took it as an attack and made it clear he thought I was the problem. "It's definitely the woman's fault," he added, as if to drive the point home. I wanted to say something, but I was too shocked. All I could manage was, "Of course, I'll get tested." But Patrick didn't let it go. "I'm too busy with work for that. You don't even have a real job. You're just coasting at your dad's company," he said bitterly. His words hurt deeply. I wasn't just coasting. I was learning everything I could from my father to prepare for the day I'd take over the company. That night, we barely spoke, and we went to bed with our backs turned, the silence heavy between us. From that point on, Patrick's attitude toward me changed. He became distant and bitter. One evening, I came home late after a meeting with my father to discuss the future of the business. Patrick was furious when I arrived. "Dinner isn't ready," he snapped. "I just got home 25 minutes ago. I'll start cooking now. Please wait a little," I explained hurriedly. But Patrick dismissed my explanation with a bitter remark. That's typical of a small company's boss's daughter. He had no idea how large my father's company was or the responsibilities I was preparing for. My father's business wasn't small. It was a major real estate company with hundreds of employees. Yet Patrick's assumptions and growing bitterness made life harder. The warmth and support we once shared felt like a distant memory. I rushed to the kitchen to make dinner, hoping to avoid another argument, but the tension in the air was undeniable. Each day felt heavier, and the love that once held us together seemed to fade a little more. I offered to cook right away and suggested, "Have a drink and relax while you wait," knowing that alcohol often calmed him. It broke my heart that our relationship seemed to rely on his evening drinks to avoid arguments. I hated being scolded, but if it kept the peace, even for a little while, I reluctantly accepted it as necessary. The next morning, Patrick was still cold toward me. As he left for work, his parting words were sharp. "Make sure dinner's ready when I get home." I let out a deep sigh and focused on the day ahead. I had taken the day off to visit the gynecologist for fertility testing, something Patrick had insisted on but refused to do himself. It was frustrating to go through it alone, but I didn't want to argue. If the issue was with me, I wanted to address it quickly, knowing time wasn't on my side. At the clinic, the waiting room was packed, and I had to sit for over an hour before my appointment. After several tests, the doctor told me the results would be available at my next visit. The thought that I might be the reason for our struggles to conceive was hard to bear, but I was ready to take any steps necessary to fix it. That evening, when Patrick came home, I told him, "I went for the fertility test today." His response was dismissive. "Figures. If the problem's with you, it's good you're getting tested. Just let me know the results." His words stung. The assumption that it was my fault hurt deeply, but I stayed quiet. 6 years passed and I turned 40. We still hadn't been able to have a child, and Patrick seemed to have given up on the idea of being a father. His late nights out became more frequent, and sometimes he wouldn't come home at all. When he did, he'd casually explain he'd been out drinking and singing karaoke until dawn. It felt like he was acting more like a carefree college student than a responsible husband, and it was incredibly frustrating. Meanwhile, my work had become more demanding, and the dream of starting a family had to be pushed aside. But Patrick's recent behavior was becoming unbearable. His disregard for our marriage was clear, and the distance between us grew every day. One afternoon, on Patrick's day off, he left the house, forgetting his phone in the living room. I picked it up to put it in his room, but just then, it started ringing. The caller ID displayed a name, Rachel. Assuming she was a colleague, I answered to let her know Patrick wasn't home. "Hey, Patrick, you're late," a woman's voice said. "I've been waiting for 55 minutes. Hurry up, or we'll miss the park opening." "We haven't had a date in so long," a playful voice said on the other end of the call. The word date hit me like a punch, and I quickly hung up, my heart pounding. This wasn't just a colleague. This woman was someone Patrick was seeing romantically. Holding his phone tightly, I felt a wave of shock and anger. While I was struggling with potential infertility, Patrick had been having an affair. His recent coldness and distance suddenly made sense. I stood there, trembling, overwhelmed by the pain of his betrayal. It was one thing to feel like he didn't need me anymore, but discovering his unfaithfulness made it all unbearable. Determined to face this head-on, I decided to gather evidence. Unlocking his phone with his birth date was easy. What I found in his call history and messages left me sick to my stomach. Dozens of texts with Rachel, filled with affectionate and intimate words. My hands shook as I took photos of everything with my own phone before putting his device back where I found it, pretending nothing had changed. For a month, I carried on in this eerie, broken marriage, holding the weight of what I knew. Then one day, my father, the president of our company, called me into his office. "I need to talk to you about something important," he said with a serious tone. His words made me brace myself for bad news, adding to the stress I was already under. That evening, as if sensing what was coming, Patrick suggested we consider separating. I had already been thinking about divorce because of his betrayal, so his suggestion caught me off guard, but it also felt convenient. "Yes, let's divorce," I said without hesitation. Patrick seemed surprised by how quickly I agreed, but it was clear he was relieved, likely excited about his future with Rachel. Despite the sting of his reaction, I calmly signed the divorce papers he gave me. "I can file these tomorrow." "I'll be moving out," he said casually. "Are you sure about the mortgage?" I asked, knowing his income wasn't enough to handle the payments. Patrick brushed off my concern, either overconfident or naive about his financial situation. Given what he had done, I felt no obligation to help him figure it out. A few days later, I moved back into my parents' house. They were worried about me at first, but when I told them about Patrick's affair, their concern turned to anger. They fully supported my decision to leave him, reassuring me over and over that walking away was the best thing I could do. To distract myself from the pain of my failed marriage, I threw myself into work. The days and weeks blurred together as I buried myself in projects and responsibilities. Before I knew it, a year had passed. One evening, exhausted from work, I could feel the weight of it all beginning to lift, as if I was finally ready to start again. My father noticed how drained I was and suggested, "Why don't you take a trip? It's going to get busy next month." He was genuinely concerned about me, and I appreciated his suggestion. Feeling mentally exhausted, I decided to take his advice and go on a solo trip to the South Carolina. I needed a change of scenery and some peace. The crisp, refreshing air of the South Carolina felt like it was healing my tired spirit. The locals were warm and friendly, and their kindness helped me slowly feel better. After a few days, I decided to extend my trip and booked a stay in Baltimore at a well-known hotel. I wanted to treat myself to the best experience possible. When I arrived, I checked in and settled in the lobby with a welcome drink. The exhaustion from my travels began to fade, and I felt truly relaxed for the first time in a long while. I even joked to myself about moving to Baltimore. It felt so peaceful. But just as I was beginning to feel at ease, a familiar voice broke the calm.
Huh?
"What are you doing here?" Startled, I turned to see Patrick walking into the lobby with two large suitcases. Seeing my ex-husband was the last thing I expected on this trip. The serene atmosphere of the elegant hotel lobby was suddenly shattered. Beside him was a young woman, probably in her early 30s. She had flawless skin, bold makeup, and striking red nails that stood out sharply against the chilly weather. Her outfit was just as bold, a short skirt, completely unsuitable for the cold. My heart sank as my eyes locked on them. Patrick and the woman looked every bit like a couple, and I couldn't stop myself from blurting out, "Why are you here? And who is she?" Patrick seemed unbothered by my question. In fact, he looked almost excited as he replied, "Oh, let me introduce you. This is Rachel, my new wife. We're on our honeymoon. Guess what? She's the daughter of a wealthy businessman." The name Rachel hit me hard. She was the same woman I'd heard on that phone call months ago. My chest tightened as I struggled to process what I was seeing. Patrick's pride in marrying someone so young and wealthy was painfully obvious. "You're here alone? That's sad," Patrick sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. Rachel smirked, her eyes scanning me critically. "Hey, Patrick, is this your ex-wife?" she asked, her voice sharp. "She looks old." "Hurry up with the check-in," she added, clearly annoyed. I bit back my emotions and tried to stay calm, even as Patrick casually wrapped an arm around her and laughed. "Yeah, I'm set for life now. Marrying into money is the best decision I ever made," he gloated. "You keep struggling in your little modest life." His loud, high-pitched laugh echoed through the lobby, completely ruining the peace I had been enjoying moments earlier. As he continued to flaunt his new life, he added, "Oh, by the way, Rachel is the daughter of Goldsmith. You know, Goldsmith Enterprises." The mention of Goldsmith Enterprises rang a bell, stirring something in my memory. I couldn't quite place it at first, but I knew the name meant something significant. I remembered everything just as Patrick's face lit up with excitement. "Impressive, huh? Her family's loaded. They even paid off her house mortgage right away." "Thanks for making the divorce so easy, Emma," he said sarcastically. Remaining calm, I replied, "Yeah, I know them. They're in that big building Baltimore loft apartments, right? I've been there." My tone was casual, not giving him the reaction he probably expected. Patrick looked surprised. "Oh, you've been there? Well, her family owns a huge company, so breaking up with you is clearly the right choice," he smirked smugly. I nodded, still calm. "That building? It's actually part of our real estate holdings," I said casually, as if it was a minor detail. Patrick and Rachel both froze, their expressions shifting to confusion. "What do you mean our real estate?" they asked in unison. "That building is rented by my father for his most prestigious office," I explained with a serene smile. "I'm not sure if your company is in real estate, but it's definitely not a shabby building." Their confusion deepened, and I could feel their skepticism. I paused for a moment before adding, "Yes, I know how impressive it is. I was there when my father purchased that building for around $800 million. Recently, he's been complaining about a tenant who hasn't paid their rent. Turns out it's your company." Their faces were priceless, shock and disbelief. Rachel broke the silence with a laugh, though it was nervous and hollow. "That can't be true. Our company's doing great," she insisted, trying to dismiss my claim. But the unease in her eyes told another story. Despite feeling shaken by seeing Patrick with his new wife, I refused to be drawn into their drama. Rachel's loud denial only added to the tension, her dismissive tone hinting that she thought I was lying to create trouble. I decided to put the matter to rest once and for all. Pulling out my phone right there in the lobby, I called my father. "Dad, I'm here with the daughter of Goldsmith Enterprises," I said. "Can you send me a copy of that rent reminder notice?" Within minutes, my phone buzzed. My father had sent a crystal-clear image of the notice, addressed to Goldsmith Enterprises, showing 5 months of unpaid rent. I turned the screen to face Patrick and Rachel. "See? If the rent isn't paid soon, we might have to consider legal action," I said, my voice calm but firm. Patrick and Rachel stared at the image, their confidence draining. Rachel's earlier laughter was gone, replaced by a mix of disbelief and panic. Patrick looked like he didn't know what to say. "What are you going to do now?" I asked quietly, holding their gaze. I asked calmly, watching as Rachel's confidence faltered. She mumbled, "Come to think of it, Dad has been really stressed lately, talking about slow sales and letting employees go." Patrick, however, went into full denial, his voice rising. "You're just making this up to split us up, aren't you? You're still that kind of person, always trying to get back at me for moving on. Your tactics are disgusting," he shouted, his tone sharp and accusing. I stepped back, stunned by his outburst. His words dragged up painful memories of our marriage and the cruel things he used to say when times were tough. But this time, I wasn't the same person who stayed silent. "What are you even talking about, Patrick?" I said firmly, my voice steady. "Do you seriously think I still have feelings for you? That's laughable. I've long moved on from a man like you. In fact, I feel sorry for Rachel, getting involved with someone so shallow." His face turned red with anger as I continued. "Did you marry her just for her money? You had shallow reasons for marrying me, too, like wanting to settle down quickly and have kids. And who is it that left me when we couldn't have children? Who called me useless because I was infertile? You did. You're to blame for everything, yet you think I'd waste another thought on you? You're delusional." Patrick's anger boiled over. "You're just an arrogant old hag. You probably can't even get married or have kids anymore. Rachel and I are planning to have a baby right after this trip," he spat, his voice desperate and bitter. It was then I decided to end his assumptions for good. I took a deep breath and said calmly, "Oh, I didn't mention it, but I'm 6 months pregnant. I'm in the stable phase now, so my dad suggested I take this trip to relax." Patrick's expression froze, his bravado vanishing in an instant. "Pregnant," he stammered, his voice cracking. "That's right," I continued. "After our divorce, I found someone who truly supports me. He's my boss at work and also a trusted subordinate of my father. He's been there for me, both personally and professionally. We got married quickly, and just 6 months ago, I found out I was pregnant. It was a grand celebration. My father and the company were overjoyed." Patrick's face turned pale as he processed what I'd just said. "You're pregnant? Were you using birth control with me?" he asked, his question so absurd that it almost made me laugh. I felt a strange mix of pity and relief as I looked at him. "My life has moved far beyond the chaos you brought into it, Patrick," I said softly but firmly. "You can keep living in your delusions, but I've built something better for myself, something you'll never be a part of." In that moment, I felt lighter than I had in years. Patrick's desperate attempts to regain control only confirmed what I already knew. I had finally let go of everything he represented. My life was now my own, and it was brighter than ever. I felt confident about my future, supported by my new husband and the responsibility of preparing to lead my father's company. My father planned to retire soon due to health reasons, and I was ready to step up. My life, once tied to Patrick's, was now entirely my own, a future filled with new beginnings and free from his shadow. Patrick's confusion was obvious as he stomped his feet, struggling to process everything. Birth control? I never did that. Remember, I told you I went for fertility tests and they found no issues with me. So, the problem wasn't just me, I said bluntly. His face twisted with the realization and he muttered, "Does that mean Rachel and I can't have kids? Why did I divorce you to marry Rachel?" His shoulders slumped and he looked utterly defeated. "What do you mean? Why?" Rachel snapped, her voice sharp. "You knew this already. You felt betrayed because you thought it was her fault." Her anger flared as Patrick's self-centered logic unraveled. I decided there was no point in staying any longer. "From now on, keep your life separate from mine," I said firmly. "As for the rent for Goldsmith Enterprises, I expect it to be paid in full. If not, we'll have to take legal action. I have nothing more to say. Goodbye." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked away, leaving Patrick and Rachel arguing in the middle of the lobby. I returned to my hotel room with a sense of peace, knowing I had closed that chapter of my life. When I got home from the trip, my husband greeted me with a warm smile. "Welcome back. I'm sorry I couldn't help around the house." "Was everything okay?" he asked. "Of course, everything was fine," I replied, smiling back. "I'm just glad I got to relax." "Thank you for taking care of everything," he said with genuine warmth. His smile was comforting, and I felt reassured, as I did every day since marrying him. Thoughts of Patrick had faded far into the background. After that incident, I never saw Patrick again. However, through my father's business contacts, I heard about what happened to Patrick and Rachel. Things had gone downhill for them. Patrick, who believed he had married into wealth, discovered that Goldsmith Enterprises was drowning in debt. News broke across TV channels about an employee at Goldsmith Enterprises embezzling millions from clients. Rachel's father had known about the fraud but tried to cover it up to protect the company's reputation. When the scandal became public, the company's stock plummeted and their credibility was destroyed. Most of their employees left, and it was clear they couldn't recover. They couldn't even pay their overdue rent. Hearing about their downfall only reaffirmed my relief at having moved on. That chapter of my life was firmly closed. Now, I was focused on a future filled with stability, love, and genuine support from my husband. It was a life Patrick could never have given me, and I couldn't be more grateful to be where I was.